I'd like to, first off, let me introduce myself. My name is Ali Kokmen. I am by day a sales director at Barnes & Noble, where thank you, where I look after ebook sales for our award-winning platform of Nook devices and e-readers and tablets and reading apps. So please, if you buy just one ebook today, please make it a Nook book. After all, every time you don't buy a Nook book, your favorite characters die. But no matter how great a reading experience I can deliver with Nook, reading experience is nothing without great things to read. And we've gathered together a panel of writers who are the absolute best at providing you with great epic stories that you want to read, however you want to do it. Ink on paper, pixels on a screen. And I'd like to introduce you to them right now. Starting up, we have Joe Abercrombie. Before becoming a full-time writer, Joe had spent 10 years as a freelance filmmaker, but now is a full-time writer with such successes as the New York Times best-selling Red Country and the First Law trilogy, The Blade Itself, Before They're Hanged, and The Last Argument of Kings.
Excellent books.
But his most recent novel is Half a King, the first book in a new trilogy featuring a young Prince Yarvi fighting to regain a throne that he never wanted in the first place. And he's from Bath, England, if you couldn't tell by his charming accent, where he lives with two wives. Two daughters and a son.
That's true.
Who wrote this?
I should say as well that I was recently voted one of the 5 most important authors on this panel. And definitely the most British.
Next up we have Grossman. The author of the New York Times best-selling Magicians trilogy, which is published in 25 countries on August 5th. Golly, that's soon. Viking will publish the final novel in that trilogy, Magician's Land. In 2011, he won the John W. Campbell Award for Best New Writer. His essays and criticisms and reviews have appeared in Time and the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and Salon and Slate and Wired and a whole bunch of other places, but the really important thing to know is that he had studied cello seriously for 10 years, but has now forgotten almost everything he's learned. And,
it's all gone.
And Patrick Rothfuss. Sure. I'm sitting in a chair. Pat Rothfuss currently lives in central Wisconsin, where he teaches at a local university. The second book in his King Killer Chronicles, The Wise Man's Fear, hit #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. He is the winner of several awards, including the David Gemmell Legend Award for Wise Man's Fear. He is currently...
I was robbed.
And is currently at work at his third novel, and he has recently been named by me possessor of at least one of the top 3 beards on this panel. Diana Gabaldon. I'm sorry, which one of you on the panel is Diana again?
Breast.
Before becoming a writer, Diana spent many years as a university professor, holding degrees in zoology, marine biology, and a PhD in quantitative behavioral ecology, making it statistically likely she is the smartest person in the room. She is the author of the award-winning New York Times bestselling Outlander novels, with more than 25 million copies in print in 35 countries and 38 languages. Or is it 38 other way? A series that has been described by Salon as the smartest historical sci-fi adventure romance story ever written by a science PhD with a background in scripting Scrooge McDuck comics. On August 9th, fans will be able to see Claire, Jamie, and the rest of their favorite characters come to life when Stars premieres the highly anticipated Outlander series, in which Diana serves as consultant and advisor. And George R.R. Martin. I have to read this, I'm contractually obligated. As a writer-producer, George R.R. Martin has worked on Twilight Zone, The Beauty and the Beast, and various feature films and pilots that were never made. As an editor, he has spearheaded some of the most exciting fantasy anthologies, such as the recent project with Gardner Dozois, the anthology Rogues, featuring short stories from top fantasy authors, including several on this panel. And he's also the #1 New York Times bestselling author of many novels, including the acclaimed Song of Ice and Fire series, which began with that title some of you may have heard of, Game of Thrones. In 2005, he was called the American Tolkien by a clever and erudite scholar and observer of the human nature.
It's stuck to you now, George. You'll never get it off.
And in this fall 2014, Bantam will publish The World of Ice and Fire, The Untold History of Westeros, and The Game of Thrones for those of you who need to keep score at home. Ladies and gentlemen, the rulers of the realm. So we're here to talk about epic fantasy writing, and I think one of the wonderful things about epic fantasy, when we put those words together, when we think about it, is we know that every story needs to have wonderful characters, and every story needs to have a beautiful setting. But in this style of writing, we up the ante that much further with the kinds of worlds that are built. And so I'd like to ask our panel what their approach to world building is when they go and concoct their stories. Start with Joe, can we start with you? Your approach to world building, sir.
My approach to world building is similar to many other areas of my work. I make stuff up. That's got to be the first and the cornerstone of the approach. But I think also, I do a lot of research is an odd word to use. It implies precision. But I read stuff, historical stuff, a lot of historical non-fiction, and that gives some sort of details which help to provide some authenticity to a world. So the rest I make up, some I steal, which really is how writing works as far as I'm aware. You steal the good bits, and then you make a few details up. Ka-ching! I mean, has anyone really got anything to add to that? I don't see how.
Diana, does that jive with your
Memory life? Yes, we are. Yes, absolutely. I decided to write historical fiction because I was a research professor. I knew how to look things up. So it seems easier to look things up than to make them up. And if I turn out to have no imagination, I can steal things from the historical record. So yeah, it works really well. But I do have an advantage over these gentlemen in that I'm actually working with history. There's a lot more written about that, so there's a lot more to steal from.
I work with history too, I just throw out the bits I don't like. Keep the good bits, file the serial numbers off, give it a new name, and hey, it works just fine, you know? Lannisters, Starks, Lancasters, Yorks, hey.
My God, I just got that.
You're spoiling the whole thing for me now.
Lev, how about for you? In your stories, in the Magician's Trilogy.
I recommend this to writers just starting out. You begin with Narnia, And then you systematically defile and degrade every part of it. Ka-ching!
I've learned so much here. I don't know how I'll be able to unlearn it. Honestly, I thought that I made things up. And then people keep sending me links to articles saying, wow, it was really clever that you took this from such and such. And I'm like, yes, I did. Yes, I did. And somebody said, wow, I didn't realize that you spoke Gaelic, but this word that you use that means this in Gaelic. And I'm like, I am clever. So my advice would be just taking credit for every accident that happens also is a strong element of the world building. Although, in all seriousness, I will say there's a big push to write what you know and all of that, and to steal from the best. Good advice. But one day my roommate came home and found me watching, like, Warlock 3. And he looked at me, and his look made the sound that all of you just made, which is... And he said, yeah, working on your novel, eh? I said, actually, I am. I am working on my novel. And you know what? And I pointed at the screen, I go, right there, no glowing crystals and bat demons in my book. This is what this movie has taught me. I want that not in my book. Like half of deciding what you want to do is deciding what you don't want to do. And when people ask for my influences, it would be much easier. I don't do it, but it would be much easier to point at the things that I've read or watched that have pissed me off to such a degree that the reaction to that is my book. I don't know what that says about
If you don't like my work, you can just say so. Do it in front of all these people in this room.
Are you certain this wasn't a scheme to try and make your viewing of Warlock 3 tax deductible?
It still counts as research.
But that raises an interesting point. Aside from watching great filmic literature, what other parts of process go into how you create your process in writing and how you approach the task? Whoever's closest to a mic.
I'm closest, I'll go. Maps. Maps are good. Some squared paper. Usually you need several types of squared paper. One is never enough. You need one with the big squares, one with the little squares, one with the tiny ones, maybe some hex paper. You know what I'm talking about. That won't always get a laugh, but here. And then there's some coloured pencils. 70 or 80 different shades is fine. And you get to work and you invent your invented world on the paper and you can see it in front of you. And having it there is useful in terms of making journeys on horseback the right length. Things of that nature. So a good map is, I find, essential in the process.
You have to be very, very careful with maps, though, because someday your publisher may come to you and say, we would like to do a map book. And it won't require any work from you. We'll just take the maps in the book and blow them up. And you'll say, ooh, that will be a good idea. You'll give me money for that. And they'll say, yes, we will. And then they'll blow up the maps and they'll call you up and say, you know that map that was in the front of your paperback, when we blow it up to poster size, it's a lot of blank spaces. Can you kind of fill that in? So then you find yourself drawing a lot of little mountains and forests, and trying to think of putting rivers there and trying to figure out a name for them, the Misty Mountains, that's what, wait a minute, someone choose the Misty Mountains. The Purple Mountains, no, that's from that song, Purple Mountains. How can I call them here? The Turquoise Mountains, no, I don't know. And then you turn in the map that you got all filled up, and they say, well, this is great for the map of Westeros. How about the world map? Okay, here's the world map. I got it. It's mostly blank, but I'll fill that in too, and then they fill it in.
Hippogriffs. You need lots of hippogriffs.
And I had the city Carth that you have way over here on the edge of the page here to the east. There's a line in book 3 where like Carth is equidistant between east and west. So could you invent a similar amount of stuff to the east that you already have to the west? Oh yes, 17 new countries, and I'll call that the Pointy Mountain. No, I already used the Pointy Mountains. So maps can take more time than you think. By the way, if you want to know where a lot of fantasy maps come from, take a look at any map in the front of your favorite fantasy book and turn it upside down. My Westeros began as upside down Ireland. You can see the fingers of the Dingle Peninsula and stuff like that. I changed things. Yeah, you look at Robin Hobb's Six Duchies, it's upside down Alaska. It's really very cool. Secrets of fantasy writing.
Here's how I did my map. I go, okay, I've got the colored pencils, right? And I've got a graph paper because...
You got a 10H?
Well...
A 10B? Full range, you need all.
That'd be telling. And so I know a big chunk of this story is going to happen in a big city. So I go, right, why do you have a big city? Well, it's usually a conflux of trade routes. Okay, so what makes trade routes? And I'm like, well, rivers are really influential there, and there's some political boundaries, but let's start with the river. And I go, so where do rivers come from? So I look at it like, there's mountains, and then there's the lay of the land, and then there's aquifers. I'm like, okay, so how does an aquifer work? So I start doing this research, and eventually, that's the secret, is to effectively become infinitely recursive, and then 14 years later, you eventually finish your map. That's not advice, actually. Don't do that.
And the day after it comes out, you get a letter from a geologist who says, you got the tectonic plates wrong.
Yep.
I've always had a slightly passive-aggressive relationship with my maps. They're drawn by this really nice guy who's an artist. He's in England. He happens to be my wife's ex-boyfriend.
Oh my God.
They're good for you. They're not good for. At least it's good for something. But there's a lot of sort of overt friendliness and then covert passive aggressiveness. So I tend to cheat on my maps a little bit in the books. If you ever find yourself in Fillory, don't trust the map.
Well, I think... I'm sorry.
Since we're still on maps, I obviously don't need to make up maps, which kind of puts me ahead of the game because I have no sense of direction anyway. But we were talking about process, and these gentlemen involve maps in their process, and I don't. I can, however, show you my process if you have 90 minutes to spare. 90 seconds. It's faster than that. I recurse also. No, what I need to start on any given day is what I call a kernel. Vivid image, line of dialogue, emotional ambiance, anything I can sense concretely. And I write it down and I stare at it and I take words out and I put words back and I move clauses around. And meanwhile, the back of my mind is kicking up questions. What time of day is it? How's the light falling? And gradually a scene begins to form from this. So on a cold day, that's one where you sit down and you say, I knew how to write yesterday, I have no idea today. This happens to everybody, believe me. And so on one of these days, I picked up a Sotheby's catalog of 18th century Scottish crystal and silver. Flipping through it, here's a nice crystal goblet with incised thistles. I said, fine, that's my kernel for today. So I mentally set it before me and started writing a line. And I was saying, crystal goblet, do we need crystal? Yes, we do. It is a crystal goblet. What am I going to do with thistles otherwise? The light fell through the crystal goblet. Of course, it's transparent. The light will pass right through it. The light fell through the thistle inside. No, that can't be right. That can't be right. The wrong rhythm. It fell through the crystal goblet with its incised thistles. Forget the thistles. This is not working. The light fell through, but it's blue light. It's blue light. It's winter. It's coming in very low. It's the light you get at 3 a.m. or 3 p.m. on a winter afternoon. The blue light of a winter afternoon fell through the crystal goblet. This is too many clunky adjective nouns. The soft blue light is not. It's a really hard edge. There's snow outside. Yeah, the cold will get the snow in there. We don't need the snow. The cold blue light of a late winter afternoon, yeah, it has to be late. The sun is really low. The cold blue light of a late winter afternoon, that's working pretty well, fell through the crystal goblet, and then, well, what did it do? Well, it fell on the table, of course. What else is it going to do? Oh, it's a table. It's sitting on a table. Okay, the cold blue light of the late winter afternoon fell through the crystal goblet and, well, fell on the table. It sounds like it went thud. Passed through the glass? No, that's too passive. Fell on the table. I can make it that if it wants to. And casting a pool of, well, it's a pool of light, of course. It's still light after it passed through the glass, you dummy. The cold blue light of a late winter afternoon passed through the crystal goblet and fell on the polished wood. It's polished, I can see it shining. The polished wood of the tabletop, but there's something about that light. It looks different. It was cold blue over here, and it's not that color at all over here. It's amber, casting a pool of amber light on the polished wood of the tabletop. Okay, now I know where I am. I'm in Jocasta Cameron's parlor. She has glass windows so the light can come in. I'm not someplace with a hide over the window. She's the only person who can afford a crystal goblet like this, and the glass is full of whiskey because that's why the light is amber. So, at that point. Slow till we get there.
You have a fascinating scene, yes, but I have a handful of text paper. You do things your way if you like.
It casts an amber light on the graph paper. and just maybe to put a bow on the whole map thing, the question that I like to ask when I find myself feeling compelled to write anything or do anything in a book, as I say, why am I doing a map? And if the answer is because I like maps, that's okay. But then I'm like, why should I feel obliged to have a map in my fantasy book? And the answer is usually, well, you just kind of do with secondary world fantasy. And then you go, well, why is that? Well, because everyone does. Well, why does everyone? Well, Tolkien did.
I would suggest the answer is so people will know where things are.
And that helps. But I actually think,
That's too easy.
if you trace it back, Tolkien, is kind of the granddaddy of fantasy, and his shadow is long, right? But why did Tolkien have a map in his book? Because there was a map in his book, in the story. It was a part of the story. And so when they bring out the map, and Thorin's there, and they're in Rivendell, and Elrond says, oh, moon letters, you go, oh, wow. And you flip to it, and there it is, it's here, I get to see the map that they're seeing. And so Tolkien had the very good reason for putting that in there. And of course, it gives you the sense of progress and the ability to engage with it. But the reason he did it is not necessarily the reason you should do it. If you're just kind of following in the tradition without thought towards the ultimate purpose and how it serves the story, you've left the path of wisdom. That's my second Tolkien quote, right? And similarly, a lot of people follow in Tolkien's footsteps. You think, if I'm writing a fantasy novel, I need to have a bunch of creative languages, because Tolkien did it, and it's kind of become a tradition. But Tolkien didn't do it for tradition, he did it because he was a language geek. And that's what he loved. And I am not a linguist, and so I need that to make my world realistic, but I don't geek out over it. I'm a geek for currency. And so my economy, I actually have it all worked out, and that filters into my books. And so that's important. Nobody ever spends money in Tolkien's books because he obviously didn't care. That wasn't a thing for him. And so when people ask about world...
He did care when they stopped paying him royalties.
That would have come out in the sequel.
Yeah.
But when people say, what should we do? I'd say, you're a geek for something. And if that's like herbology or like the nature of the night sky or plate tectonics, it's like revel in your geekery, roll around in it, and make that a part of your world, because that will be really interesting to the people reading because you're interested in it. Whereas if you try to do something because you feel like you're supposed to, I don't think that's the best way to really enjoy yourself and make a vibrant world.
Did something kind of interesting in the maps in Lord of the Rings. I remember when I read it for the first time, because the first map you encounter in that book is the map of the Shire. And of course it fills the entire page. Here's the West Farthing and the South Farthing and the East Farthing and the North Farthing, very imaginatively named. And Hobbiton in the middle of it, and and you're reading it and it's like, okay, I'm reading a book that's set in this world called the Shire, and this is a big place, and he's talked about how the people in the North Shire or North Farthing are different from the people in the East Farthing, and the ones who live near the river are kind of peculiar. And you're thinking, well, this is obviously very important because he's devoting so much time to it. And then they leave the Shire. They go to Bree, and they cross the Barrow Downs, they get to Rivendell, and suddenly you get another map, and you can barely find the Shire. It's this little tiny kind of thing over here, and there's a whole gigantic world, and there's this wonderful feeling of, holy shit, I've just been reading about the backyard here. An epic journey to get from Hobbiton to Bree, and the big danger was the mushroom farmer. Really, there's more going on than this. There's an enormous world, and I love that feeling that it's sort of you pulled the rug out from under you. The first map is just a feint.
Well, it's an interesting point. So, when you write, if you're not writing for the ghost of Tolkien, who are you writing for? And who is your first reader? And how do you know it's okay for that person to read what you've written?
Oh, let's see. Well, my first reader is actually me, and that's who I'm writing for. Yes, you guys don't actually matter. If you have more than one reader, there's absolutely no way to please them all, so you might as well not bother. But as for the actual set of eyes that's laid on my stuff once I've written it, that would be my husband. I've had him for 42 years, and so I'm reasonably sure I trust him by this time. But he's the only person who reads pieces as I write them, because I don't write in a straight line, I don't write with an outline, I don't plan the books ahead of time. So what he gets are these little disjunct pieces, which works because he doesn't really read books. He does read, but in short, disjunct pieces, which means that he has trouble with novels. He has a very fine literary eye, though, and a very fine storytelling eye, and if I give him a scene and I know there's something wrong with it, but I'm not sure what, he can tell me what. He can put his finger on it and he'll say, this person wouldn't do that here. They might do it someplace else, but they didn't do it here. And I'll look and say, yeah, you're right, okay, no problem. He's very valuable. And it's good to have a first reader who you trust, but it depends what you're trusting them for. I can trust him for things like that. I can discuss the overall march of things. And he's also pretty good for manly things. Being the possessor of a pair of testicles, I can say, look, operating in the grip of testosterone, what would this person do? Because it's not what the sane person would do, mostly. And, he will tell me.
Yeah, I suppose I'd certainly echo what Diana was saying. I mean, when the question came, my first thought was, all right for me. And if some of the little people enjoy it, that's a bonus. I think you have to write to your own taste. You have to write to the kind of story that you love, that you inspires you. As Pat was saying, the things that cover your own interests. The minute you start to write to some kind of imagined taste, some audience that you imagine is out there somewhere, you're doomed. I mean, you're probably doomed anyway. Global warming and all that. I don't see a way back. But if you'd like to write a fantasy story before the end of the world, I would advise sticking to your own taste. But then certainly, you know, a reliable beta reader, as they say, is vital as well. My parents have served that purpose. They've been my fiercest critics ever since I was born. And that's continued with my written work. You know, I know that if they tell me, you know what, Joe, this is not nearly as bad as I thought it would be. I know I've got some real gold there. It doesn't happen often. So it's important to have a critical, savage, well-informed reader to, you know, take a look and give you a second opinion.
That almost sounds like a cry for help. Would you just
Yeah, it was a cry for help.
My first reader is my wife. My wife is significantly more intelligent than I am, so it's very helpful. She's an English professor. She does 18th century stuff. The bar is Jane Austen. I'm never going to get near that bar. I can't even see the bar. But it's good. There's a bar up there, and I can show her quite early drafts because you know, I mean, my wife can see my early drafts. She's seen some terrible things in her day. She can look at those too. And I write for myself. I'm an asshole. I'm very uncharitable. I know that I'm going to be tough on myself because I'm a very grumpy reader, and that helps. It's good to have a grumpy reader.
Yeah, I just have to echo what everyone else says here. I mean, you write for yourself. I've known writers who have tried to write for the audience or for publishers or for trends, and I've seen them spend years and decades running from one trend to another to try to be successful. Oh, so, you know, I'll write some science fiction, I'll write some cyberpunk. Cyberpunk's very hot. Oh, now I'll write steampunk because everybody likes steampunk. Oh, wait a minute, epic fantasy is catching on. I'll write that. Oh no, urban fantasy. And they keep switching genres, trying to hook onto something instead of just writing the kind of stories they really want to write, the stories that excite them, that interest them, the stories that they lose themselves in. And, you know, Pat was right about obsessions too. I mean, for me, one of the things about the Middle Ages that I love is heraldry. And there's a lot of stuff in my book about all the heraldry of the various houses. And I love it. I devote a lot of time to it. I also devote a lot of time to feast. For some reason, I seem to have a certain attraction to food.
I noticed.
And some of my readers don't like that. They go, it's gratuitous, gratuitous eating. It doesn't advance the plot to know how well the swan is cooked. And why do we know all this heraldry? It's too much. I'm not interested in heraldry. And, you know, well, fine. Write your own book, leave out the heraldry. This is my book, I'm going to put in the heraldry. And we're not even going to get into the whole question of sex and gratuitous sex. And can any sex really be gratuitous? I don't think so. But no, you write the things that interest you. You know, you use someone who's really interested in plate tectonics. I don't think I'd be lined up to buy that fantasy about a lot about plate tectonics, but if that's what, you know, floats his boat, hey, maybe he'll make me interested in it.
Yeah, and you hope that your own interest is contagious. Now, I'm delighted that I get to be contrary here in terms of the write for yourself. Because mostly I agree with them, but once they were all in a row, I'm a really contrary person.
We've noticed.
The secret is out. But I have, like, for the first book I probably had 200 or 300 people beta read it. And actually I mean, it's nice to have a smart person read your book, or a writer to read your book, because writers give you writery feedback. But actually, I don't aim for that. I don't want writers to give me feedback, because generally speaking, I'm not writing a book to be read exclusively by writers. I just want people to read my book. And so, like, a plumber reads my book, but he also happens to be a part-time musician, and he goes, so there's this part in the book, and I'm like, oh, really? Thank you. Whereas writers know a lot about writing, other people know a lot about everything else. And so one of my friends who's a history major read my book and he went, so if this city has this many people in it, it must be like surrounded by wheat fields. And I go, actually, yeah. And so we talk about that. Somebody else goes, you know, actually, lutes have like 14 strings. This was like 12 years into writing the book. Now, it wasn't a musician I gave the book to. I gave it to an aquatic toxicology person who's working as a graphic designer. And he goes, yeah, 14 strings. If one of them breaks, it's not a big deal. I'm like, I almost made it into the finished book. I didn't do enough lute research, apparently. And so I get so much beta reader feedback because if one person says something, I'll just disagree with them and I'll shut them down. And then if two people say something and I disagree, I'll still ignore them. But then three, and I'm like, I'm wrong. But if you don't have 3 beta readers, how can you get there? If you don't have maybe 10, 3 people might not comment on this thing. And again, I'm not offering this as advice. This is a confessional thing. This is a part of my court-mandated therapy.
It's a safe space, it's okay.
Where I'm obsessive in gathering this feedback and seeing how people really feel about it. And so I'm writing for that. I'm using them as a representation of this mythic, perfect audience that you imagine when you write. And then I they're my control group. I don't even know what I would call them, but it's essential to my process. And with this more recent book, I only had like 40 beta readers, and I'm really antsy about it because I feel like I haven't put it through the testing process appropriately. See, and you know how crazy this is, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking you're giving us all a bad name with this whole admission that writers can be wrong about things. The part that really worried me, I think you need to talk to your union rep about that. Wrong thing. Yeah. That seems like a painstaking process. I'd find that really, I don't know, exhausting is the wrong word, but I find it a lot to process. You know, I couldn't take more than 2. Initially, on the latest book I've done, I had maybe 3 editors, all giving 4 editors, all giving kind of their own set of notes, and that became quite a lot to kind of take in. So yeah, everyone has their own process. It's often fascinating to hear how much they differ in the way they go about things.
I actually use about 25 beta readers, and I do that because I read about it on Pat's blog. I'm going to do it, Pat.
I'm spreading this contagion.
Exactly. Yes, well, you did answer who's your first reader, and we answered, that doesn't mean you're not going to let anyone else read it ever. I do use experts. You know, if I've written a medical scene, I'll look it up, I'll research it, I'll watch YouTube videos on how to amputate a leg, and then I will write the scene. But I do know 3 or 4 or 5 doctors, and I will say, hey, would you have a look at this? And usually they'll read through it and they'll say, well, yeah, it's great. He said, but if I were doing this myself, this might happen. And they could come up with lots more gruesome details than I could ever find out by myself. So yeah, you certainly should call on experts when you have them to hand.
Do they have amputations on YouTube?
Oh yeah. Just Google how to amputate a leg.
I will.
Are you planning to amputate a leg above the knee?
So we'll have some time for some questions from the audience, and I see our friendly con staff has set up the microphone down the aisle. So if you've got one that you'd like to ask, you can begin queuing up. But while we do that, I just want to ask our august panel. I'm not looking. That's just scary, isn't it? But I just want to ask a quick question because, of course, there are no better books to read than the ones these 5 authors have written. But if you had to recommend a book for someone else, throw someone a bone. What would you recommend? What are you reading other than the books you have written, or that your neighbor here has written as well? What would you recommend for us?
Who reads books, man? That's just
Prince is dead.
lately, what have we been reading lately?
Yes.
Question. I recently read Jeff Vandermeer's book, Annihilation. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Jeff Vandermeer. I love him as a writer, and he writes very weird fiction, very, very hard to categorize. Usually his work is excellent for lovers of fungi. So if you like mushrooms, possibly intelligent mushrooms, he's the writer for you. And he recently finished this quite unusual 3-volume trilogy. Very short books, very strange books, but create an atmosphere unlike anything else, really. So yeah, Annihilation, the first one's called. I'd recommend that.
2 quick recommendations. Kate Atkinson. When I heard she was writing a non-Jackson Brodie book, I threw my hands up in disgust, and then I went and bought it anyway, and it's fantastic. Life After Life. Just unbelievable tour de force. And there's a book coming out in a couple of weeks called Whiskey Tango Foxtrot by a guy named David Schaefer. It's his first book. It comes out same day my book comes out. Don't buy his, buy mine. But you might catch us in paperback because it's unbelievably brilliant.
Very cool. Well, let's see, for people who like series, I'd recommend Phil Rickman, R-I-C-K-M-A-N. He writes a series of what are ostensibly crime novels, but their central character is an Anglican vicar named Marilee Watkins. She's a widow with an obnoxious teenage daughter, and she is also the official exorcist for the Diocese of Hereford. And there's a strong supernatural element that weaves through the books, along with a lot of other stuff. But for a single book that I'd recommend, the best thing that I've read in several years, it's Christopher Brookmeyer's Pandemonium. That is just the most brilliantly constructed and imaginative and intelligent book I've read in 10 years, probably.
Well, this is I'll go more to the classics here, all the books anyway. This is an audience of devoted to fantasy, so I assume you guys all know the classics of fantasy. If not, you should certainly repair your education by reading Robert E. Howard, by reading J.R.R. Tolkien, by reading Fritz Leiber and his Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser books, and especially by reading Jack Vance, who is not as well known as the other 3, but to my mind is the 4th great pillar of on which epic fantasy and sword and sorcery rests. Google the Clever and the Lioness series in fantasy and all his numerous science fiction is worth reading. For epic fantasy, I also recommend reading straight historical fiction. There's the works of Bernard Cornwell, who I think writes better battle scenes than any writer who has ever lived. And his battles are amazing, and his history is amazing. There's, for other great historical books with also a lot of humor and sex and adventure, George MacDonald Fraser's Flashman series, about a rogue and ne'er-do-well and coward and seducer who blunders his way through all of the wars of Victorian England. It's enormously entertaining. Thomas B. Costain, best-selling historical novelist of the 50s. His nonfiction 4-volume History to Plantagenets is full of stuff that fantasy writers can steal from, and it's also immensely entertaining, but also his books, some of which were made into bad movies or mediocre movies, but the books are better. The Black Rose, The Silver Chalice, many other things.
In respect to the world building, I gotta mention Tim Powers. I'm cheating here, it's not the books that I'm reading right now, but, and you mentioned, you irritated that the author wasn't writing what you kind of wanted next. I was excited to get a Tim Powers book, and I pick it up, and 6 pages in, I'm like, did you write a freaking spy novel? I'm like, I could not give less of a damn about your spy novel. And then like 8 pages in, I'm like, oh yeah. But in terms of world building, it's set in this world, and he starts with like the Bible and Shakespeare and real things and Mount Ararat, and then eventually I'm like, there are like Jan protecting the borders of Russia, and I'm like, as in like Jinn, genies. And I was like, well, yeah. And I'm like, wait, no. I know this is probably not true, and this is true, but where the hell did you make that connection where I didn't realize you were leading me down this path? It's amazing. It's amazing. It's called Declare. I'm also reading the Laura Ingalls Wilder books because I have a little boy, and they should actually be named The Adventures of Pa Ingalls, Pioneer Badass. I'm like, really? And you'll learn a lot about world building there too. It's just keeping your eyes open. You can find this stuff anywhere. Because talk about building a world, I live in Wisconsin and I have learned things about pioneer Wisconsin reading these books. I'm like, wow, I guess I can make cheese now. Just stunning stuff. And it's extra good at the end.
Will come in handy when the zombie apocalypse comes, or cheese making skills.
Yeah.
So should we take some questions? I think we should.
Hi, I just want to first of all say that I've read at least one of each of your books, and thank you for bringing in a world today when things are kind of tough, a world that we can escape to, so thanks for that. My question is for those of us who are writers out here, like, what is the toughest thing for you guys to get through when you're in the midst of writing a novel, and how do you get through it?
Inertia. Yeah, and the longer you go without writing anything, the harder it is to start again. So you keep going, basically, is the answer. And what happens when you're totally stuck, you don't know what to do? You write anyway. That's it.
I personally find that the hardest bit is getting through that long period between the first sentence and the last. you hate the book and yourself. You write the first sentence and it's like, this is the best first sentence I've ever seen! And then the second sentence, oh, now we're running into trouble. And then, by the quarter mark, you're kind of thinking, I hate myself, I'm an awful writer, I've never written anything good, I'll never write anything as good as that last book again. And I say to my wife, it's never been this bad before. She says, it's like this every time. For God's sake, shut up. And then when you get to the end of the book, you start to, once again enjoy what you're doing and think, yeah, this is good. Why did I ever doubt myself? So it's just keeping ahead, keeping on, and sort of not getting into a slump, not getting down on yourself in the work, but just trying to forge on. I think that's what I've learned to do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Rise, sir.
Hey.
Ask your question.
I'm also a big fan of all of you. And my question relates to what Lev was saying about Jane Austen. And part of what Jane Austen does is explore at the onset these flawed relationships and then get to the companion ideal. And I was wondering, given that all of you have these great relationships in your books, and thoughts on love, what is really it's kind of a super broad question, but what's your understanding personally of love, and how do you explore kind of the unhealthy and healthy relationships in your own books?
I've explored a lot of unhealthy relationships. I'll answer that broad question with a broader answer. Make a lot of mistakes in your life. And the earlier you make them, the more useful they will be to you. And the more forgivable they will be from your peers and the police. But we learn through failure and mistakes. And so if you do everything really carefully and properly and right, you actually kind of, you don't have the motivation to evolve that fuck-ups like me do, And so you screw things up, you take your lumps. I mean, who here knows what a broken arm feels like? I don't actually, so I have to fake it. But I would probably write that a little better if I climbed more trees as a kid. So just do it. Get out there, don't just write, do crazy stuff and get your heart broke a couple of times. That's bad advice, don't listen to it.
And you can't hold back. One thing I discovered when I started writing fantasy, my first 2 novels were not fantasy. Fantasy is raw. There's a lot of really naked emotion in it. And you can't hold back. to be very honest in fantasy, even when that feels painful because you're maybe coming into contact with sides of yourself that aren't your favorite sides. You can't lie in fantasy because everybody will know.
Yeah, no, that's dead right. Honesty is also the key to real-life relationships and so forth. Though the best key to a happy marriage is to pick the right person.
I've been given, lucky enough to have been given 2 really great pieces of writing advice. One was from my mother, which was be honest, be truthful, always think, is this true? When you describe something, does it look like that? The other one, great piece of writing advice I've tried to live by, is every morning, get dressed. It can be a problem for writers.
No, wait a minute. I wrote many of my best work in a red flannel bathrobe.
That counts.
Try and top that if you can.
This question is directed at Mr. Martin, though I would appreciate it if everyone would give their input. You've said before, and it shows in your work, that you're trying to make a very objective universe. You're trying to undermine stereotypes, have moral ambiguity, introduce strong female characters. What steps do you take to counter your inherent biases when you're writing a story? And sort of as a follow-up question, how do you interact with a story that you're reading that has very clear biases?
Well, I think it's an obligation. We're writing fantasies and we're writing things that have dragons in them and, dire wolves and magic spells and things that don't exist. But, which I know some mainstream critics or people coming from the more literary side of the spectrum dismissal of fantasy because of those things. But regardless of whether a story has a dragon in it or a spaceship or anything like that, I think the ultimate core of it is still the human heart in conflict with itself, as Faulkner said, and it's the obligation of the writers to tell the truth as they see it. And that's what I try to do. I mean, I try to look at the world and tell the truth, be true to my own characters, be true to my own feelings. The world's a complex place, of course. Some of these issues are extremely complex issues. One way I tackle them, at least, is by having a cast of thousands in which people can have differing opinions on these issues. For example, you mentioned writing strong women characters. This is something I get asked about a lot, and how do I write strong women characters? I don't set out to write strong women characters. In fact, I don't set out to say, I am now writing a woman. I just create a character. My focus is on individual. This is Cersei. This is what she would think of this situation, given her upbringing and her personality and the psychoses or neuroses that drive her and her goals in life. This is Brienne, who has a very different outlook on life. She's going to take things differently. You build up the characters as individuals. You talk about the question of biases. The biases that I think will bite you in the ass most easily are the ones you don't even think about, where you're just writing something and you haven't even noticed that it's biased because it's so ingrained into culture and into yourself and the way it's brought up that you don't even stop to question it. And of course you can't stop, if you ever want to finish anything, you can't stop to question every word in a 1,500-page manuscript, or it will take even longer than my books do. But you do need to be conscious sometimes if you're called on something and examine whether some unconscious or subconscious bias was at work there. Be open to that kind of criticism.
Well, if there's one thing we've learned from this conversation is that it can be very difficult to finish things, but unfortunately I've gotten the sign we are at the close of our time today, so my apologies to the rest of our questioners. I would like to thank all of you for coming, of course, and to Joe,